Okay, so this is Comrade Meow's audiobooks, and we're reading the last part of a manifesto for America's communist generation, which is the manifesto of the Revolutionary Communists of America, which is part of the Revolutionary Communist International. All right? So I'll jump right in. The section we're on is called Consciousness, and this is the manifesto of the Revolutionary Communist International, the last few sections. Consciousness. The growing economic and social instability threatens to undermine the foundations of the existing order. How can one explain the violent swings in elections everywhere, to the right and to the left and back to the right? The myopic left reformists blame the workers for their alleged backwardness. That is the way they try to excuse themselves and cover up their own pernicious role. But what this reflects is desperation and a complete lack of a serious alternative. The masses are desperately trying to find a way out, and they are testing one option after another. One government, party, and leader after another is put to the test and found wanting and discarded. In this process, reformists play a most lamentable role, and the left reformists an even more lamentable one, if that is possible. Arising out of this, we see a change in consciousness. It is not the kind of slow, gradual change one might expect. It takes time to mature, naturally, but changes of quantity eventually reach a critical point where quantity suddenly becomes quality. Sharp changes in consciousness are inherent in the whole situation. That is precisely the kind of change we are now seeing, particularly in the youth. A survey asked over 1,000 British adults to rank the words and phrases they associate most with capitalism. The top results were greed at 73%, quote-unquote constant pressure to achieve 70%, and corruption at 69%. Nice. 42% of respondents agreed with the phrase, quote, capitalism is dominated by the rich. They set the political agenda, unquote. The change is most clearly expressed in the trend towards communist ideas among the youth. These young people call themselves communists, although many have never read the Communist Manifesto and have no knowledge of scientific socialism. But the betrayals of the left have made the very word socialism stink in their nostrils. It does not resonate anymore with the best people. They say, we want communism, only that and nothing less than that. What is a communist? In the section of the Communist Manifesto titled Proletarians and Communists, we read the following. In what relation do the communists stand to the proletarians in the whole? Communists do not form a separate party opposed to the other working class parties. They have no separate interests, and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole, they do not set up any sectarian principles of their own, by which to shape and mold the proletarian movement. The communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only. In the national struggles of the proletarians of the different countries, they point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independently of all nationality. The communists, therefore, are on one hand practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country, that section which pushes forward all others. On the one hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. End quote. These lines express the essence of the matter very well. Is the time right for a revolutionary communist international? The growing backlash against the so-called free market economy has terrified the apologists of capitalism. They are looking with dread towards an uncertain and turbulent future. Together with this pervading mood of pessimism, The more thoughtful representatives of the bourgeoisie are beginning to discover uncomfortable parallels with the world of 1917. It is in this context that the need for a revolutionary party with a clear banner and clear revolutionary policies is posed. The international character of our movement derives from the fact that capitalism is a world system. From the very beginning, Marx strove to create an international organization of the working class. However, since the Stalinist generation of the Communist International, no such organization has existed. Now is the time to launch a revolutionary Communist International. This will be seen by some as sectarianism, but it is nothing of the sort. We have absolutely nothing in common with the ultra-left and sectarian grouplets who strut around like ridiculous peacocks on the fringes of the labor movement. We must turn our back on the sectarians and face forwards the fresh new layers who are moving towards communism. The need for such a step is neither an expression of impatience nor of subjective volunteerism. It is rooted in a clear understanding of the objective situation. It is this and nothing else that renders such a step absolutely necessary and unavoidable. Let us examine the facts. The latest poll from Britain, the USA, Australia, and other countries provide us with a very clear indication that the idea of communism is spreading rapidly. The potential for communism is enormous. Our task is to make this potential a reality by giving it an organizational expression. While I turn pages here, please like, share, and subscribe. By organizing the vanguard in a genuine revolutionary communist party, by fusing it with a disciplined Bolshevik organization, educating it in Marxist ideas, and training it in Lenin's methods, we will build a force that can play a key role in the development of the socialist revolution in the coming period. That is our task. We must overcome all obstacles in order to achieve it. Stalinism versus Bolshevism. For a long time, the enemies of communism believed that they had successfully exorcised the ghost of the October Revolution. The collapse of the Soviet Union seemed to confirm their belief that communism was dead and buried. Quote unquote, "The Cold War is over," they quoted, "and we won." However, contrary to the legend so persistently repeated by our class enemies, it was not communism that collapsed in the 1980s, but Stalinism, a horrible, bureaucratic, and totalitarian caricature that bore no relation to the regime of workers' democracy established by Lenin and the Bolsheviks in 1917. Stalin carried out political counter-revolution against Bolshevism, basing himself on a privileged caste of officials that rose to power in a period of the ebb of the revolution following Lenin's death. In order to consolidate his counter-revolutionary dictatorship, Stalin was obliged to murder all of Lenin's comrades and a huge number of other genuine communists. Stalinism and Bolshevism, far from being identical, are not only different in kind, they are mutually exclusive and mortal enemies separated by a river of blood. Degeneration of the quote-unquote communist parties. Communism is indelibly associated with the name of Lenin and the glorious traditions of the Russian Revolution. But the communist parties of today are communist in name only. The leaders of those parties long ago abandoned the ideas of Lenin and Bolshevism. A decisive break with Leninism was the acceptance of the anti-Marxist policy of socialism in one country. In 1928, Trotsky predicted that this would inevitably lead to the national reformist degeneration of every communist party in the world. This prediction proved to be correct. At first, the leaders of the communist parties obediently carried out the dictates of Stalin and the bureaucracy, slavishly following every twist and turn that came from Moscow. They later repudiated Stalin, but instead of returning to Lenin, they made a sharp turn to the right. In breaking from Moscow, in most countries, these parties adopted reformist policies and perspectives. Following the fatal logic of quote-unquote socialism in one country, the leadership of every nationalist party adapted themselves to the interests of the bourgeoisie of their own country. This has led to the complete degeneration and even the total liquidation of the communist parties. The most extreme case was the Italian Communist Party, PCI, which used to be the biggest and most powerful in Europe. The policies of the national reformist generation led, in the end, to the dissolution of the PCI and its transformation into a bourgeois reformist party. The British Communist Party nowadays only has influence through a daily paper, the Morning Star, the line of which does not go further than a tepid version of left reformism. It is, in effect, only a left cover for the trade union bureaucracy. The Spanish Communist Party, PCE, is in a coalition government that is sending arms to Ukraine as part of NATO's war against Russia. As a result, the PCE has entered a sharp decline. The youth wing, UJCE, rejected the official line and were expelled. The Communist Party of the United States, CPUSA, functioned as little more than an election machine for the Democratic Party, calling for a vote for Biden as a quote-unquote vote against fascism. The South African Communist Party has been part of the pro-capitalist ANC government for 30 years, and even defended the massacre of 34 striking miners in Marikana in 2012. The list is endless. Again, while I turn pages here with one hand, please like, share, and subscribe so I can keep doing this and feed these cats. The crisis in the communist parties. At this critical moment in world history, the international communist movement finds itself in complete disarray. Communist parties across the world have responded to the massacre in Gaza with calls to respect international law and the resolutions of the United Nations, that is, the major imperialist powers. But it was the invasion of Ukraine and Russia in February 2022 that provoked a deep split, with most communist parties scandalously bending to the position of their own ruling class. Many communist parties, particularly in the West, covered their tacit support for NATO with pacifist appeals for peace negotiations, etc. The onslaught on Gaza by Israel has made things even worse. The French Communist Party, PCF, for instance, withdrew from the left electoral coalition, NUPES, because its leader, Mélenchon, refused to characterize Hamas as a terrorist organization. At the other extreme, some parties have become little more than instruments of Russian and Chinese foreign policy, presenting them as progressive allies in the struggle of weak independent nations to break free of imperious colonization and dead slavery. The Communist Party of the Russian Federation, CPRF, is an extreme case. It has lost any claim to an independent existence, let alone a communist one. The party of Zyuganov long ago became just a camp follower of Putin's reactionary regime. These contradictions have led to a series of splits. An international meeting of Communist and Workers' Parties, IMCWP, in Havana in 2023 failed to even produce a statement on the Ukraine war as it could not find a consensus. The crisis in the communist movement and the role of the KKE. Many rank-and-file communist workers have reacted against this shameless revisionism. The Greek Communist Party, KKE, has undoubtedly taken important steps in rejecting the old discredited Stalinist Menshevik idea of two stages. It adopted a correct internationalist stand on the Ukrainian war, which it characterizes as an inter-imperialist conflict. It led a movement of workers to boycott the shipment of arms from Greek ports to Ukraine. This will be welcomed by all genuine communists. However, while it is clearly of great importance, it is too early to conclude that the progress made by the Greek communists has been completed. In particular, it is necessary to break completely from the anti-Marxist theory of socialism in one country and to adopt a Leninist united front approach. The KKE is attempting to build links with other communist parties that share its position on the Ukraine war as an inter-imperialist conflict. That is a step in the right direction. However, the prior condition for success is an open and democratic debate involving all genuine communist tendencies in the world. On the basis of diplomacy and quote-unquote consensus, as opposed to debate and democratic centralism, it is impossible to reconstruct a real communist international based on the ideas and methods of Lenin. It is our task to return the movement to its genuine origins, to break with cowardly revisionism and embrace the banner of Lenin. To this end, we extend a hand of friendship to any party or organization that shares this aim. When Trotsky launched the International Left opposition, he envisioned it as the left opposition of the international communist movement. We are genuine communists, Bolshevik Leninists, who were bureaucratically excluded from the ranks of the communist movement by Stalin. We have always fought to maintain the red banner of October and genuine Leninism. And now we must reclaim... Oh, I lost my place. We have always fought to maintain the red banner of October and genuine Leninism. And now we must reclaim our rightful place as an integral part of the world communist movement. The time has come to open an honest discussion in the movement about the past, which will finally break with the last remnants of Stalinism and prepare the ground for lasting communist unity on the solid foundations of Leninism. Down with revisionism, for the fighting unity of all communists, back to Lenin. Lenin's policy. Our immediate task is not to win the masses. That is something entirely beyond our present capabilities. Our aim is to win over the most advanced and class-conscious elements. Only in this way can we find a road to the masses. While I turn the page with one hand, please like, share, and subscribe. But we cannot treat our approach to the masses lightly. The new generation of workers and youth are looking for a way out of the impasse. The best elements have understood that the only solution lies in taking the road of socialist revolution. They are beginning to understand the nature of the problems before them and are gradually beginning to grasp the need for radical solutions. But their impatience can lead them to make mistakes. The work of communists would be very simple if all that was required was to bombard the working class with revolutionary slogans. But that is completely inadequate and can even become counterproductive. The working class can only learn through experience, and especially the experience of great events. Usually, it learns only slowly, too slowly for many revolutionaries who fall under the influence of impatience and frustration. Lenin understood that before the Bolsheviks could conquer power, they first had to conquer the masses. For this, great flexibility in tactics is necessary. Lenin always recommended revolutionaries to be patient. Patiently explain was his advice to the Bolsheviks, even in the heat of the revolution of 1917. Without a grasp of tactics, setting out from the concrete experience of the working class, all talk of the building of the revolutionary movement is idle chatter. It is like a knife without a blade. That is why the questions of strategy and tactics must occupy a central place in the considerations of the communists. Both Lenin and Trotsky had a very clear idea about the relationship of the communist vanguard to the mass reformist organizations. This was summed up in what was undoubtedly Lenin's definitive statement on revolutionary tactics. Left-wing communism and infantile disorder. Over a century later, Lenin's writings on this important subject remain a book sealed by 7 seals for the pseudo-Trotskyist sectarians. They have everywhere discredited the banner of Trotskyism and have rendered invaluable services to the bureaucracy. They imagine that the mass organizations can merely be written off as historical anachronisms. Their attitude to these organizations is confined to shrill denunciations of betrayal. But these tactics lead straight into a blind alley. They have nothing in common with the flexible methods of Lenin and Trotsky, who understand the necessity for communists to build bridges to the mass of workers who remain under the influence of reformists. We must turn our backs resolutely on this sterile sectarianism and face boldly towards the working class by patiently explaining communist policies to the masses and placing demands on the reformist leaders. It is possible to win the reformist workers over to communism. All power to the Soviets. It is sufficient to mention the fact that in 1917, Lenin advanced the slogan of all power to the Soviets. At a time when these organizations, which represented the mass of workers and soldiers, were under the control of the reformist Mensheviks and social revolutionaries. With this slogan, Lenin was saying to the reformist leaders of the Soviets, "Very well, gentlemen, you have the majority. We propose that you take power into your hands and give the people what they want: peace, bread, and land. If you do this, we will support you. Civil war will be avoided, and the struggle for power will be reduced to a peaceful struggle for influence inside the Soviets." The cowardly reformist leaders had no intention of taking power. They subordinated themselves to the bourgeois provisional government, which in turn subordinated itself to imperialism and reaction. The workers and soldiers in the Soviets were thus able to see for themselves the treacherous nature of their leaders and turn towards Bolshevism. Only by such means was it possible for the Bolsheviks to pass from a small party of approximately 8,000 members in February 1917 to a mass force capable of winning the majority in the Soviets in the period immediately preceding the October Revolution. Above all, it is necessary for us today to maintain a sense of reality. The genuine forces of communism have been thrown back by the historical forces beyond our control. We are reduced to a minority of a minority in the working class movement. We have the correct ideas, but the great majority of the working class have yet to be convinced that our ideas are correct and necessary. For the most part, they remain under the influence of the traditional reformist organizations for the simple reason that the leaders of those organizations offer them what seems to be an easy and painless way out of the crisis. In reality, this road leads only to further defeats, disappointments, and misery. The communists can, under no circumstances, abandon the working class to the tender mercies of the reformist class traders and bureaucrats. On the contrary, we must conduct an implacable struggle against them. But there is no way that the working class can avoid passing through the painful school of reformisms. Our task is not to snipe at them from the sidelines, but to go through the experience with them side by side, helping them to draw the lessons and finding the way forward, as the Bolsheviks did in 1917. Build a bridge to the workers. We must establish a dialogue with the working class, in which we are seen not as alien elements or enemies, but as comrades in struggle against a common enemy, capital. We must prove to them the superiority of communism, not in words, but in deeds. We must find ways and means to gain an audience among the mass of the workers who remain under the influence of reformism. The bureaucracy will use every unscrupulous method to isolate the communists from the rank and file workers. Bans, proscriptions, expulsions, lies, slanders, insults, and attacks of all sorts. But the communists will always find ways and means of overcoming these obstacles. There is no way in which the bureaucracy, which has usurped the leadership of the workers' organizations, can prevent the communists from reaching the working class. There is no golden rule for determining tactics, which are determined by concrete conditions. This is not a principled but a practical question. Lenin always had a flexible attitude to tactical matters. The same Lenin who stood implacably for a break with social democracy in 1914 and supported the establishment of an independent communist party in Britain also proposed the British Party apply for affiliation to the Labour Party while maintaining its own program, banner, and policies. Under certain circumstances, it may be necessary to send all our forces into the reformist organizations in order to win over the leftward moving workers into a firm revolutionary position. At the present stage, however, this is not posed. The conditions for it are absent, but at all times it is necessary to find a road to the working class. That is not a tactical question, but a matter of life and death for the communist vanguard. The communists, even while working as an independent party, are duty-bound to face towards the mass organizations of the working class, pursuing a united front tactic wherever possible. In order to find a road to the masses, this is the ABCs for anyone even remotely acquainted with the ideas and methods of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky. Our policy is precisely based on Lenin's advice and the thesis of the first 4 Congresses of the Communist International. If this is not understood by our sectarian critics, that is entirely their misfortune. What are we fighting for? In essence, the aims of the communists are the same as those of the workers in general. We stand for the complete elimination of hunger and of homelessness, for guaranteed work in good conditions, for the drastic reduction of the working week and the conquest of free time, for guaranteed high-quality health care and education, for an end to imperialism and war, and for an end to the insane destruction of our planet. But we point out that under the conditions of the capitalist crisis, these aims can only be achieved through an implacable struggle, and that this can only ultimately be successful when it leads to the expropriation of the bankers and the capitalists. It was for this reason that Trotsky developed the idea of transitional demands. The communists will intervene with the utmost energy in every struggle of the working class. The concrete demands that communists raise in the movement will of course change frequently in line with changing conditions, and will vary according to the conditions in each country. Therefore, a programmatic list of demands would be out of place in a manifesto of this nature. However, the methods by which the communists in all countries should formulate concrete demands was elaborated brilliantly by Trotsky in 1938 and published in the foundational document of the Fourth International, The Death Agony of Capitalism and the Tasks of the Fourth International, or the Transitional Program, as it is more commonly known. The demands presented in that document represent a summing up of the program worked out by Lenin and the Bolsheviks, and are contained in the published thesis and documents of the first 4 Congresses of the Communist International. The basic idea of transitional demands can be simply stated. Trotsky explained that in the period of capitalist decline, any serious struggle for improved living standards will inevitably go beyond the limits of capitalist property relations and of the bourgeois state. Just as in warfare, defensive battles can become transformed into offensive ones, so it is in the class struggle. The fight for immediate demands can lead under certain circumstances to a leap in consciousness and a movement in the direction of a revolutionary struggle for power. In the last analysis, no reform can ever acquire a lasting character unless it is linked to overthrow of the bourgeois order. The communists fight for the total emancipation of the working class, for freedom from oppression and agony of toil. This can only be achieved by the destruction of the bourgeois state, the expropriation of the means of production, and the introduction of socialist planning under democratic workers' control and management. Upon this, the future of humanity depends. In the words of the great Irish Marxist James Connolly, "For our demands most moderate are, we only want the earth." Is communism a utopian idea? The last refuge for the defenders of capitalism is to say that there is no alternative to their bankrupt system. But can any reasonable person believe this? Can it really be true that the human race is incapable of conceiving of a system that is superior to the present horrific situation? Such a fantastic assertion represents a monstrous libel on the intelligence of our species. The abolition of the dictatorship of the bankers and capitalists will allow the creation of an economy that is rationally planned to satisfy the needs of humanity, not the rapacious greed of a handful of billionaires. The solution is obvious to any serious thinking person, and it is now within our grasp. That is the only way to abolish hunger, poverty, wars, and all the other ills of capitalism and create a world fit for human beings to live in. The enemies of communism argue that this is a utopian idea. This accusation has an ironic ring to it. What is utopian is precisely a socioeconomic system that has outlived its usefulness, the very existence of which stands in flagrant contradiction to the actual needs of society. Such a system has no right to exist and is condemned to end in the dustbin of history. There is nothing utopian about communism. On the contrary, the material conditions for a new and higher human society already exist on a world scale and are ripening rapidly. The enormous advances in science and technology offer a tantalizing picture of a world free from poverty, homelessness, and hunger. The development of artificial intelligence, combined with modern robotics, could serve to reduce the hours of work to a point where ultimately people will no longer have to work except out of personal choice. The abolition of slavery, of labor, is precisely the material premise for a classless society. That is now entirely possible. It is not a utopia, but something that is well within our grasp. A new world is in the process of being born, growing silently but steadily within the womb of the old. But under capitalism, everything is turned into its opposite. In a system where everything is subordinated to the profit motive, every new technology advance signifies an increase in unemployment, together with a lengthening of the working day and an increase in exploitation and slavery. All that we propose is to substitute an unjust and irrational system where everything is made to subordinate to the insatiable greed of a few for a rational and harmonious planned economy based on production for the satisfaction of human needs, for a genuine communist international. 3 decades ago, at the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, Francis Fukuyama triumphantly proclaimed the end of history. But history is not so easily disposed of. It continues on its way, regardless of the opinions of bourgeois scribblers. And now, the wheel of history is turned 180 degrees. The fall of the Soviet Union was undoubtedly a great historical drama, but in retrospect, it will be seen only as the prelude to a far greater drama, the terminal crisis of capitalism. For the reasons outlined above, the present crisis will be prolonged in nature. It can last years or even decades with ups and downs due to the absence of the subjective factor. However, this is only one side of the coin. The crisis will be long and drawn out, but that does not at all mean that it will be peaceful and tranquil. On the contrary, we have entered the most turbulent and disturbed period in the history of modern times. The crisis will affect one country after another. The working class will have many opportunities to take power. Sharp and abrupt changes are implicit in the whole situation. They can erupt when we least expect them. We must be prepared. It is no longer necessary to convince broad layers of the youth of the superiority of communism. They are already communists. They are looking for a clean banner, an organization that has broken radically with reformism and the cowardly left opportunism. We have to take all the practical measures possible to find them and recruit them. This involves the proclamation of a new party and a new international. The entire situation demands it. It is an absolutely necessary and urgent task that admits no delay. What is required is a genuine Communist Party, which bases itself on the ideas of Lenin and the other great Marxist teachers, and an international, on the lines of the Communist International during its first 5 years. Our numbers are still small when compared to the great tasks that confront us, and we have no illusions on that score. But every revolutionary movement in history has always begun life as a small and seemingly insignificant element. We have important work to do, and that work is already bearing important fruit and is reaching a decisive stage. We are growing rapidly because we are now swimming together with the current of history. Above all, we have the correct ideas. Lenin said Marxism isn't all-powerful because it is true. This fact fills us with confidence in the future. The French utopian socialist Fourier defined socialism as the way to make actual the potential of the human race. Under communism, for the first time in human history, the doors will be flung open to the masses to really grasp the world of culture which has been denied to them. The road will be open for an undreamed of blossoming of art, music, and culture such as the world has never seen, for a new world in which life will acquire an entirely new meaning. And for the first time, men and women will be able to raise themselves to their true stature on the basis of complete equality. It will be humankind's leap from the realm of necessity to the realm of freedom. No longer will men and women have to direct their eyes to the clouds in search of a better life after death. They will experience a new world in which life itself, purged of oppression, exploitation, and injustice, will acquire an entirely new meaning. That is the wonderful thing for which we are fighting, a paradise in this world. That is what real communism means. That is the only cause worth fighting for. That is why we are communists. It is incumbent upon every one of us to make sure that this work is carried out immediately with no hesitation and with the absolute conviction that we will succeed. Let our fighting slogans be: down with the imperialist robbers, down with capitalist slavery, expropriate the bankers and capitalists, long live communism, workers of all countries unite, forward to the building of a new international. So this has been the Manifesto of the Revolutionary Communists of America and the Revolutionary Communists International. Please like, share, and subscribe so I can keep doing this and keep feeding these guys. And I will read the conclusion here. Capitalism is on the brink. An entire generation has known only crisis, poverty, exploitation, war, and climate catastrophe, and yet the rich have seen their wealth grow enormously. People are drawing the conclusion that the root of the problem is capitalism. Millions of people in the U.S. now have a favorable view of communism. Communism is not just a good idea or an identity. Communists dedicate their lives to conquering Marxist ideas, intervening in the class struggle, and fighting for revolution. We must understand the world in order to change it. We begin by analyzing the real developments that are taking place under capitalism and the forces which drive the system into crisis. The communist newspaper and Marxist books are political tools for the successful development of the new communist movement that can carry out socialist revolution in our lifetime. Subscribe now to support the independent revolutionary press and receive every issue of the communist newspaper, and visit marxistbooks.com for a wide selection of communist literature and merch. But we are not only publishers. We are an active organization with communist branches across the U.S. and sections around the world. The building of a revolutionary organization is the burning question, not in the remote future, but now. We are determined to carry out this historic task. That is why we are appealing to you to join the party. Help us build the Revolutionary Communists of America. So here's some QR codes. And again, please like, share, and subscribe. My name is Daniel Allen Baker, and I'm a combat veteran of the YPG International. I fought against ISIS on the front lines from Rojava in the autonomous zone in northeast Syria. The YPG International is basically a socialist militia under the ideology of democratic confederalism, and they draw their roots from Marxism-Leninism. So I encourage you to join the Revolutionary Communists of America, get organized, and as soon as you join, hit the street and set up a table, recruit, fundraise for the party, and start weekly meetings. And for those of you who join in a bigger city, look for your local RCA. For those of you outside the US, look for your local RCI or RCP. We are in over 24 countries all around the world. And in these countries, in every region, we have cells of various sizes. And we are quickly growing. So I will wrap it up in about half an hour. I will be live streaming my daily routine of meditation, yoga, and martial arts in the same room here after I clean it up. And I invite you to join me so that you can be strong for the revolution.